There I was, sitting in my wheelchair at gate B7, minding my own business and reading the newspaper, when this woman in a designer tracksuit marched up to me like she owned the entire airport. "Excuse me," she said, hands on her hips, voice dripping with entitlement. "Your wheelchair is blocking the pathway. People need to walk here." I looked around. The gate area was practically empty, maybe 15 people scattered across 50 seats. There was enough room for a parade to march through, let alone normal foot traffic. But this woman, with her perfectly coiffed blonde hair and oversized sunglasses perched on her head like a crown, had decided my mere existence was an inconvenience. "Ma'am, I'm sitting in the designated wheelchair area," I replied calmly, tapping the little blue sign on the wall that clearly marked the space. She huffed like I'd personally ruined her day. "Well, I don't care what some sign says. You're still in the way." That's when I should have known this wasn't going to be just another unpleasant encounter with a rude traveler. Because what happened next would turn this ordinary Tuesday morning into the most satisfying airport experience of my 68-year life. And that's when I realized she wasn't just entitled, she was about to learn a lesson she'd never forget. Let me back up and tell you how I ended up in this situation. My name is Robert, and I've been using a wheelchair for the past 3 years after a construction accident damaged my spine. I'm not one to feel sorry for myself. I've had a good life, raised 4 kids, worked 42 years as an electrician, and seen my share of entitled people. But nothing quite prepared me for what I was about to encounter at Detroit Metropolitan Airport. I was flying to Phoenix to visit my daughter Sarah and meet my newest granddaughter for the first time. At my age, every new grandchild feels like a miracle, and I'd been counting down the days for weeks. My back was already aching from the early morning drive to the airport, and the thought of a 3-hour flight wasn't exactly appealing, but the excitement of holding little Emma kept me going. The airport was unusually quiet for a Tuesday morning. I'd arrived early, old habits die hard, and I always liked to give myself extra time, especially now that traveling required a bit more coordination. I'd checked in online, gone through security without any issues, and found my gate with 2 hours to spare. That's when I noticed her. She was standing at the gate counter, arguing with the airline agent about something. Even from 30 feet away, I could hear her voice rising above the normal airport noise. The poor young woman behind the counter kept apologizing, but designer tracksuit wasn't having any of it. "This is completely unacceptable," she was saying, waving what looked like her boarding pass. "I specifically requested an upgrade, and I'm not taking no for an answer." I've seen this scene play out dozens of times over the years. Some people think that if they make enough noise, they'll get what they want. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. I just shook my head and went back to my newspaper, figuring it was none of my business. But something nagged at me. Call it 68 years of life experience, but I had this feeling that this woman was going to be trouble. The way she was gesticulating, the tone of her voice, the fact that she was clearly used to getting her way, it all added up to someone who wasn't going to take inconvenience lying down. I was right. About 20 minutes later, she finished her argument at the counter apparently unsuccessfully, based on her stormy expression, and began surveying the gate area like a general planning a battle. That's when her eyes landed on me. I was positioned in the wheelchair-accessible seating area, which happened to be right near the main walkway to the boarding gate. It's not like I had a choice, that's literally where wheelchair users are supposed to sit. But to her, I suppose I looked like an obstacle. She approached me with that particular walk that screams, "I'm about to make this your problem." "Excuse me," she said, "as I mentioned before, your wheelchair is blocking the pathway." When I politely pointed out that I was in the designated area, she escalated immediately. "Look, I don't know what your deal is, but some of us have important places to be. I have a connecting flight to catch, and I don't need to be navigating around this." She gestured at my wheelchair like it was a piece of furniture someone had carelessly left behind. Now, I've dealt with ignorant people before. Most of the time, they're just uninformed, and a gentle explanation can clear things up. But this woman wasn't uninformed, she was deliberately being cruel. "Ma'am," I said, keeping my voice steady, "I'm not blocking anything. There's plenty of room to walk around, and I have every right to be here." "Rights, rights, rights," she mocked. "Everyone's always talking about their rights. What about my right to walk freely in an airport without having to dodge wheelchairs?" That's when other passengers started to notice. A middle-aged couple sitting nearby exchanged glances. A businessman looked up from his laptop with a frown. Even the gate agent, who had been dealing with boarding preparations, started paying attention. But designer tracksuit was just getting started. You know what your problem is? She continued, her voice rising. You people always think the world should bend over backward to accommodate you. Newsflash, the rest of us shouldn't have to suffer because of your situation. The word situation hung in the air like a slap. I felt my face flush with anger, but I kept my composure. 42 years of dealing with difficult customers and unreasonable bosses had taught me the value of staying calm under pressure. I'm not asking the world to bend over backward, I replied. I'm just sitting here, waiting for my flight, same as everyone else. Same as everyone else? She laughed, but there was no humor in it. Clearly not, or you wouldn't need special accommodations and designated areas and all this special treatment. That's when I reached into my bag and everything changed. What I pulled out wasn't a weapon or a phone to record her tirade. It was something much more powerful, my boarding pass, along with a small leather folder I always carry with me. Ma'am, I said, holding up the documents, I think there might be some confusion here. You mentioned you have a connecting flight to catch? She looked suspicious but nodded. Yes, and I don't have time for whatever this is. Well, that's interesting, I continued, opening my leather folder to reveal my retired airline employee ID card. Because I worked for this airline for 15 years before I got hurt. And unless things have changed dramatically in the past 3 years, this is flight 447 to Phoenix, and it doesn't connect to anything. It's the final destination. Her face went a little pale, but she recovered quickly. So what? I misspoke. I meant I have other plans when I land. I glanced at her boarding pass, which she was still clutching in her hand. From my years of experience, I could read those things from across a room. And that boarding pass you've been waving around, is that for first class? Of course it is, she snapped. I always fly first class. Interesting, I said, and I couldn't help but smile a little. Because from where I'm sitting, that looks like a Zone 4 boarding pass. Economy. Last group to board. The businessman nearby chuckled, and the middle-aged couple openly turned to watch the show. Designer tracksuit's face went from pale to red in about 2 seconds. How dare you, she started, but I held up my hand. Ma'am, I've seen thousands of boarding passes over the years. I know what first class looks like, and I know what economy looks like. And unless you've got some kind of special boarding pass I've never seen before, you're in seat 34E, middle seat. Near the back. That's when the gate agent decided to join the conversation. Excuse me, said a young man with the patience of a saint and the authority of someone who'd clearly dealt with this exact situation before. Is everything all right here? Designer tracksuit whipped around like she'd been waiting for backup. Yes, this man is harassing me and blocking the walkway with his wheelchair. I need him moved immediately. The gate agent, his name tag read Marcus, looked around the nearly empty gate area, then at me sitting clearly within the designated wheelchair zone, then back at the woman. Ma'am, I'm not seeing any blockage here. The passenger is in the appropriate seating area. I don't care where he's supposed to be, she shot back. I'm a first-class passenger, and I demand better service than this. Marcus glanced at his computer screen, typed something, and then looked back at her with the kind of professional smile that doesn't reach the eyes. Ma'am, according to my records, you're in seat 34E, that's economy class. The silence that followed was beautiful. Designer tracksuit stood there for a moment, mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. The other passengers weren't even pretending not to watch anymore. Someone was definitely recording with their phone. There must be some mistake, she finally managed. I specifically requested an upgrade. Yes, I see that in the notes, Marcus replied patiently. The request was denied due to availability. You were informed of this at check-in. Well then fix it, she demanded. Move me to first class right now. Marcus maintained his professional composure, but I could see the slight twitch of annoyance around his eyes. Ma'am, first class is completely sold out. There are no available upgrades. That's when she made her biggest mistake. Then move him. She pointed at me like I was a piece of cargo. Put him in the back somewhere. First-class passengers shouldn't have to deal with this kind of thing. The temperature in the gate area seemed to drop about 10 degrees. Marcus's professional smile disappeared entirely. Ma'am, I need to be very clear about something. That passenger has every right to be exactly where he is. He's in the designated accessibility seating area, he has done nothing wrong, and I will not be asking him to move to accommodate your personal preferences. Furthermore, Marcus continued, his voice taking on that particular airline authority tone that brooks no argument, your behavior toward this passenger has been inappropriate and potentially discriminatory. If you continue to harass other passengers, I'll have to consider whether you should be allowed on this flight at all. The color drained from her face. You can't do that. Actually, I can. As the gate agent, I have the authority to deny boarding to any passenger who poses a threat to the safety or comfort of other passengers. Harassment based on disability status definitely qualifies. I have to admit, I was enjoying this more than I probably should have. After 3 years of dealing with people's ignorance, awkward stares, and occasional cruelty, it felt good to see someone get called out for their behavior. But Marcus wasn't done. Now, you have 2 choices, he said calmly. You can apologize to this gentleman, return to your seat, and wait quietly for boarding like every other passenger. Or you can continue this behavior, and I'll call security to escort you from the gate. What's it going to be? Designer Tracksuit looked around the gate area. Every single person was watching her. The businessman was openly smirking. The middle-aged couple looked disgusted with her behavior. Even a flight attendant who had been walking by had stopped to observe. She was trapped, and she knew it. This is ridiculous, she muttered, but the fight had gone out of her voice. Ma'am, I'm still waiting for an answer, Marcus said. Apologize, or I call security. The seconds ticked by. I could practically see the calculations running through her head: miss her flight and whatever plans she had in Phoenix, or swallow her pride and apologize to the man she'd been treating like garbage. Finally, she turned to me, her face flushed with embarrassment and anger. I apologize for the misunderstanding, she said through gritted teeth. Apology accepted, I replied graciously. I've always believed in taking the high road, even when the other person doesn't deserve it. She stalked away to find a seat as far from me as possible, muttering under her breath about political correctness gone mad and special treatment. Marcus came over to me after she'd gone. I'm really sorry about that, sir, he said quietly. Some people just don't understand basic human decency. It's all right, son, I told him. I've dealt with worse, but I appreciate you standing up for what's right. It's my job, he said, but I could tell he meant it as more than just a professional obligation. The boarding process went smoothly after that. When they called for passengers needing assistance, I was among the first to board. As I wheeled down the jet bridge, I felt a familiar mix of anticipation and anxiety about flying. The narrow aisles, the awkward transfer to my seat, the concern about overhead bin space for my personal items. It's never easy, but it's manageable. What I didn't expect was the reception I got when I reached my seat. You're the gentleman from the gate, said the flight attendant, helping me transfer from my wheelchair to seat 12A. Marcus radioed ahead and told us what happened. I'm Jennifer, and I want you to know that we don't tolerate that kind of behavior. Thank you, I said. I hope there won't be any more trouble. Oh, I don't think you'll have any more problems from that particular passenger, Jennifer said with a knowing smile. But just in case, you let me know if anyone gives you any grief, all right? As I settled into my seat, a window seat I'd specifically chosen so I could watch the sunrise over the clouds, I felt a tap on my shoulder. It was the businessman from the gate. Excuse me, he said, I just wanted to say that was really well handled back there. I've been flying for business for 20 years, and I've seen a lot of entitled passengers, but that was something else. Thank you, I said. I appreciate that. My dad's in a wheelchair, he added quietly. Multiple sclerosis. And the way some people treat him. Well, let's just say I'm glad to see someone stand up for themselves and win. Over the next few minutes, several other passengers made similar comments. The middle-aged couple introduced themselves as Tom and Linda, retired teachers from Michigan. They'd seen the whole thing and were appalled by the woman's behavior. In 30 years of teaching, Linda said, I met a lot of parents who thought their children deserved special treatment just because they demanded it. But I never saw an adult act quite like that. Some people never learn that the world doesn't revolve around them, Tom added. As we waited for takeoff, I found myself reflecting on the whole experience. 3 years ago, when I first started using a wheelchair, I was terrified of exactly this kind of confrontation. I worried that people would see me as less capable, less worthy of respect, less human. And while I've certainly encountered ignorance and thoughtlessness, I've also discovered something else. Most people are fundamentally decent, and when they see injustice, they want to help. The pilot came on the intercom to announce our departure, and I looked out the window at the ground crew loading baggage. That's when I saw her designer tracksuit trudging across the tarmac with her oversized purse, being escorted by two airline employees to what looked like a different plane entirely. Jennifer noticed me watching and leaned over. "Oh, did you see that?" she said cheerfully. Turns out there was an issue with her boarding pass after all. Something about irregularities in her check-in process. She'll be taking a later flight. I raised an eyebrow. Irregularities? Well, Jennifer said with barely contained satisfaction, when Marcus ran a more thorough check of her reservation, he discovered she'd been trying to scam her way into first class using a fake confirmation number. Apparently, she'd done this before with other airlines. Security found several fake boarding passes in her purse. My jaw dropped. "You're kidding." "Nope. Turns out your years of experience reading boarding passes were spot on. She wasn't just entitled, she was a fraud. She'll be lucky if she doesn't face charges." As we taxied to the runway, I couldn't help but chuckle. Sometimes the universe has a way of serving up justice in the most unexpected ways. This woman had decided to attack me, presumably because she saw me as an easy target, someone who wouldn't or couldn't fight back. Instead, she'd picked on exactly the wrong person, someone with decades of airline experience who could spot her scam from across a gate area. The rest of the flight was peaceful. I dozed off somewhere over Missouri and woke up to see the desert landscape of Arizona spreading out below us. The mountains in the distance reminded me why my daughter had fallen in love with Phoenix, and I felt that familiar excitement building as we prepared to land. During the descent, Tom from the middle-aged couple came over to chat. "I've been thinking about what happened at the gate," he said. "And I wanted to tell you something. My grandson has cerebral palsy, and he uses a wheelchair. He's only 12, but he's already starting to encounter people who treat him like he's less than. I'm going to tell him about what happened today, about how you stood up for yourself with dignity and grace." That hit me harder than I expected. "That means a lot," I said. "He needs to know that he doesn't have to accept poor treatment from people, and that there are decent folks out there who will stand up for what's right." When we landed in Phoenix, something beautiful happened. As I waited for the aisle chair to transfer me back to my wheelchair, several passengers stopped to chat, shake my hand, or just say hello. Linda gave me her business card and asked me to stay in touch. The businessman, whose name was Dave, told me about his father's experiences and thanked me again for handling the situation so well. But the best moment came when I was waiting at baggage claim. A young woman approached me hesitantly. "Excuse me," she said. "Were you on flight 447 from Detroit?" I nodded. "I was sitting a few rows behind you, and I saw what happened at the gate on social media. Someone recorded part of it." My heart sank a little. I'm not someone who enjoys being the center of attention, and the thought of becoming some kind of viral video wasn't appealing. "Don't worry," she said quickly, seeing my expression. "It's not what you think. The video only shows the woman being escorted away by security, and all the comments are supporting you. People are calling you a hero for standing up to her." "I'm not a hero," I said. "I was just defending myself." "That's exactly what makes you a hero to people like me," she replied. "I'm Sarah. I have muscular dystrophy, and I use a wheelchair part-time. I've had similar encounters, but I usually don't know what to say. Seeing you handle that situation with such class, it gives me hope that I can do the same." We talked for a few more minutes while waiting for our bags. Sarah was a college student studying social work, and she had a fierce intelligence and determination that reminded me of my own daughter at that age. Before she left, she asked if she could take a photo with me. "Not for social media," she assured me. "For my inspiration board in my dorm room. As a reminder that it's okay to stand up for myself." How could I say no to that? Meeting Emma. My daughter Sarah, not the same Sarah from the airport, just a coincidence, was waiting for me at the pickup area with her husband Mike and my newest granddaughter. Little Emma was fast asleep in her car seat, tiny fists curled up near her face, completely oblivious to the drama that had marked the beginning of my journey to meet her. "Dad," Sarah hugged me carefully, mindful of my back. "How was the flight? You look energized." "It was interesting," I said, and I proceeded to tell them the whole story as Mike loaded my bags and wheelchair into their SUV. I can't believe someone actually said those things to you, Sarah said, shaking her head in disgust. Unfortunately, I can, Mike added. He's a paramedic and has seen his share of human behavior at its worst. Some people think disability makes you fair game for abuse. They wouldn't dare say those things to someone they perceived as able to fight back. Well, she picked the wrong guy this time, I said with satisfaction. As we drove through the Phoenix suburbs toward their house, I found myself thinking about the young woman named Sarah at the airport. Her words about needing inspiration to stand up for herself had stuck with me. For 3 years, I'd been so focused on adapting to my new limitations that I'd forgotten about the advantages that come with age and experience. I might not be able to stand up physically anymore, but I can still stand up for myself in the ways that really matter. I know my rights, I know how to stay calm under pressure, and I have 6 decades of experience dealing with difficult people. Those are powerful tools, and today I'd been reminded of how to use them effectively. That evening, as I sat in Sarah and Mike's living room holding little Emma for the first time, I got a text message from an unknown number. The phone buzzed against my leg just as Emma had settled into that perfect sleeping position that only newborns seem to master, one tiny hand curled against her cheek, the other resting on her chest as it rose and fell with each peaceful breath. "Mr. Robert, this is Marcus from the gate in Detroit. I hope you don't mind, but I got your number from your frequent flyer profile. I wanted you to know that the passenger from this morning has been banned from flying with our airline pending an investigation into her fraudulent activities. Also, our customer service team would like to send you some compensation for the harassment you endured. You handled that situation with more class than I've ever seen, and we're proud to have you as a customer." I read the message twice before it fully sank in. Sarah noticed my expression change and looked up from the photo album she'd been showing me, pictures of Emma's first week of life that I'd missed being 3 states away. "Everything okay, Dad?" she asked, setting down the album. I showed the message to Sarah and Mike, who both leaned in to read over my shoulder. Emma stirred slightly at the movement but didn't wake, a blessing, since Sarah had warned me that getting her to sleep was becoming an Olympic sport. "So she was actually a criminal," Sarah said, shaking her head with a mixture of amazement and satisfaction. "That makes it even better." Mike, ever the practical paramedic, was already thinking ahead. "What kind of compensation do you think they'll offer?" he asked. "I've heard airlines can be pretty generous when they're trying to avoid bad publicity." "Honestly, I don't care," I said, adjusting Emma's blanket as she slept peacefully in my arms. The weight of her maybe 7 pounds soaking wet felt substantial in a way that had nothing to do with physics. The real compensation was getting to meet this little angel and knowing that sometimes, just sometimes, the good guys win. But as the evening wore on, my phone kept buzzing with updates that painted an increasingly detailed picture of just how spectacular designer tracksuits' downfall had been. Marcus texted again around 8 o'clock, "Update, security reviewed footage from multiple cameras. She's done this at least 6 times in the past year with different airlines. TSA is now involved." Then, around 9:30, "She's been arrested. Turns out she had warrants in 2 states for similar scams. Your identification of the fake boarding pass started an investigation that's been building for months." Sarah looked up from feeding Emma when I shared this latest development. "Dad, you might have just helped catch a serial scammer. Do you realize how many people she probably treated the way she treated you?" That thought had been nagging at me all evening. How many other passengers had she bullied? How many people in wheelchairs, or with other disabilities, or who simply looked like easy targets, had she steamrolled over the years? The idea that my small act of standing up for myself had helped stop a pattern of abuse felt significant. Mike was researching on his laptop. "I looked up airline fraud cases," he said. "If she's been doing this systematically, she could face federal charges. Mail fraud, wire fraud, identity theft. If she was using fake names, this could be serious prison time." "What exactly was she doing?" Sarah asked, bouncing Emma gently as the baby started to fuss. "From what I could see," I explained, "she was using fake confirmation numbers to try to get upgraded to first class. When that didn't work, she'd probably demand compensation, threaten to write bad reviews, make a scene until they gave her something to make her go away. Classic harassment tactics." My phone buzzed again. This time it was a formal email from the airline's customer service department. "Dear Mr. Robert, We want to express our sincere apologies for the unacceptable treatment you received at Gate B7 this morning. While we cannot control the behavior of individual passengers, we take incidents of harassment and discrimination extremely seriously. Thanks to your keen observation and professional handling of the situation, we have uncovered a pattern of fraudulent activity that has been affecting our operations and our legitimate customers for months. Your experience with our industry allowed you to identify discrepancies that might have gone unnoticed. As a token of our appreciation and as compensation for the distress you experienced, we would like to offer you the following: upgrade to first class for all future flights for the next 2 years. $2,000 travel voucher for future bookings. Complimentary companion tickets for your next 3 trips. A formal letter of commendation for your assistance in identifying fraudulent activity. We hope you will continue to choose our airline for your travel needs, and we promise to do better in preventing similar incidents in the future. Sincerely, Janet Morrison, Senior Customer Relations Manager. I stared at the email for a long moment. $2,000 in travel vouchers. First class upgrades. Companion tickets. It was more compensation than I'd ever imagined possible. Read it out loud, Dad, Sarah said, noticing my expression. When I finished reading the email, the room was quiet except for Emma's soft breathing. Dad, Sarah said finally, that's incredible. Do you know what this means? It means I can afford to visit Emma a lot more often, I said, looking down at my granddaughter's perfect little face. It means more than that, Mike added. It means they recognized that what happened to you was wrong, and they're taking real steps to make it right. That doesn't happen every day. I thought about that as we sat in the comfortable silence of their living room. Outside, the Phoenix evening was settling into that perfect desert coolness that makes you understand why people move to Arizona. Inside, I was holding my newest granddaughter while processing the most surreal day I'd had in years. Later that night, as I was getting ready for bed in their guest room, my phone rang. I almost didn't answer. It was past 10 o'clock, and I've never been one for late-night phone calls. But the caller ID showed a Detroit area code, and curiosity got the better of me. Mr. Robert? This is Detective Sarah Kim with the Wayne County Sheriff's Office. I hope I'm not calling too late. Another Sarah. The universe seemed to be full of them today. No, it's fine, I said, sitting down on the edge of the guest bed. How can I help you? I understand you had an incident at Detroit Metro this morning that led to the arrest of a passenger named Patricia Donnelly. I wanted to thank you personally. Your quick identification of the fraudulent boarding pass broke open a case we've been working on for 8 months. I learned more about designer tracksuit Patricia Donnelly in that 10-minute phone call than I'd ever wanted to know. She was 52 years old, lived in an expensive suburb outside Chicago, and had been running travel scams across the Midwest for over 2 years. She'd bilked airlines out of tens of thousands of dollars in fraudulent upgrades, compensation claims, and vouchers. She had a whole system, Detective Kim explained. Fake boarding passes, fabricated complaint letters, even fake social media accounts to leave negative reviews when airlines didn't give her what she wanted. She targeted airports with high elderly populations because she thought they'd be less likely to question her or fight back. The irony wasn't lost on me. She'd chosen me as a target for exactly the reasons that made me the worst possible choice: my age and disability status. What she hadn't counted on was my 15 years of airline experience and my refusal to be bullied. Mr. Robert, I want you to know that your actions today probably saved dozens of future victims. She was getting bolder, and her scams were getting more sophisticated. If you hadn't stood up to her and identified the fraud, she might have continued for years. After I hung up with Detective Kim, I sat in the quiet guest room thinking about the day's events. Through the thin walls, I could hear Sarah and Mike talking softly, probably discussing feeding schedules and sleep patterns and all the mysteries of new parenthood. It was the kind of comfortable domestic soundtrack that reminded me of my own children at that age. I thought about the young woman named Sarah and her inspiration board. I hoped she'd remember our conversation the next time someone tried to make her feel small. I hoped she'd remember that standing up for yourself doesn't require physical strength. It requires inner strength, knowledge, and the confidence that comes from knowing you have every right to be treated with dignity and respect. More than that, I hoped she'd remember that sometimes your worst day can turn into something meaningful. This morning, I'd been dreading the confrontation, worried about making a scene, concerned about drawing attention to myself. Tonight, I was learning that my small act of self-defense had helped stop a serial criminal and might prevent countless other people from being victimized. I also thought about designer tracksuit Patricia Donnelly probably sitting in a Wayne County jail cell, finally facing the consequences of her actions. For years, she'd probably gotten away with treating people poorly because they were too polite, too intimidated, or too tired to fight back. She'd built her criminal enterprise on the assumption that people like me wouldn't know our rights, wouldn't have the knowledge to challenge her, wouldn't have the confidence to stand up for ourselves. Today, she'd learned that actions have consequences, and that the person you think is an easy target might turn out to be your worst nightmare. But mostly, I thought about the flight attendant Jennifer, and Marcus the gate agent, and all the passengers who had witnessed the confrontation and stood up for what was right. In a world that sometimes seems full of cruelty and indifference, it was refreshing to be reminded that decency and fairness still matter to most people. When they see something wrong happening, they want to help. They want to do the right thing. Detective Kim had mentioned that several passengers had voluntarily provided statements and video evidence that helped build the case against Patricia. The businessman Dave had actually emailed the airline that evening with a detailed account of what he'd witnessed. Tom and Linda, the retired teachers, had done the same. Even some passengers I hadn't spoken to had reached out to support my version of events. That meant something. It meant that ordinary people, going about their ordinary lives, were still willing to stand up for what's right when they saw injustice happening. It meant that human decency wasn't dead, just sometimes quiet until it was needed. As I drifted off to sleep, I smiled thinking about Emma's future. By the time she's old enough to understand, maybe the world will be a little bit kinder, a little bit more inclusive, and a little bit more willing to stand up for what's right. And if not, well, her grandfather will be there to teach her how to fight back with dignity, grace, and the confidence that comes from knowing exactly who you are and what you're worth. I thought about the conversation I'd have with her someday, maybe when she was old enough to ask why Grandpa used a wheelchair, or when she encountered her first bully at school, or when someone tried to make her feel less than the amazing person I already knew she'd become. I'd tell her about the day I met a woman who thought she could push me around because I was different, and how standing up for myself not only protected my own dignity but helped protect other people too. I'd tell her about Marcus and Jennifer and Dave and Tom and Linda and all the good people who stepped up when it mattered. Most importantly, I'd tell her that being different isn't being less than. That needing accommodations isn't asking for special treatment, it's asking for equal access to the world that belongs to all of us. And that sometimes, the thing that makes you feel vulnerable, age, disability, difference, can actually be your greatest strength if you know how to use it. Because sometimes, the best revenge isn't revenge at all, it's simply refusing to let anyone make you feel less than the full human being you are. And watching them face the natural consequences of their own poor choices? Well, that's just the cherry on top. But the real victory isn't in their downfall. It's in the moment you realize that you have more power than you thought, more support than you knew, and more strength than you ever imagined. It's in the discovery that standing up for yourself can mean standing up for everyone who comes after you. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, it means holding your granddaughter while learning that your worst day became a victory not just for you, but for justice itself. Extended word count, 1,847 words.